Hi. Today we're going to have a think about our emotions and how we can handle our emotions in a way that's good for us and good for the people round about us. So, what are emotions? It's quite a difficult question. We talk about being emotional, but what does that actually mean? What are they? How do you define emotions? Now, I think if you look online and you do some research into this, it's actually quite difficult to pin down what emotions actually are. But I think a sort of helpful way of thinking about it is that they're a mixture of three things. They're a mixture of physical responses that we have in our body. So we know that if we're feeling angry, for example, or really frightened, that we have physical things that happen in our body, like our heart racing or our muscles going tense. Then there's the thoughts that we have that are linked in with the emotions. So those neural pathways and the patterns of thinking that we've talked about previously. And then there are feelings that we have, sort of gut feelings, feelings inside of us. So they're a mixture of those three things together. Scientists would perhaps say that or psychologists would say that they're a feeling derived from our circumstances or our mood or our relationship with other people. So a feeling, it seems to be, the feeling is the word that is used most commonly around emotions. I feel whatever. There's quite a lot of research done about 50 years ago into emotions. I mean, if you go back 100 years or so, it wasn't really a word that was actually used, emotions. So it's quite a recent thing talking about our emotions. But a lot of work was done by a guy called Paul Eckhart, and he researched across all cultures and came up with 6 basic emotions that he found in those cultures, and he felt that were the foundation for our emotions. So I'll read them to you. So he said fear, sadness, anger, disgust, happiness, and surprise. Fear, sadness, anger, disgust, happiness, and surprise. So they were the 6 basic emotions that seem to go across culturally, that were sort of foundation of emotions that everybody would have to some degree. And following on from that, lots of people have done work around emotions, and I suppose you could add to that any number of other feelings that we describe. So things about like embarrassment or shame, guilt, anticipation, lots of other things that you could add that we perhaps describe in more detail. But those 6 are probably the root ones that people would talk about. And we're actually made to have emotions. We're actually created to have emotions. It's part of who we are as human beings. And it's interesting that in the Bible, God has emotions, and we're made in his image. So, we're made to have emotions, and we're made to express emotions. We're not meant to squash them away. We're made to express them. And I think a lot of our problems come because we either suppress emotions, we squash them down and pretend that they're not there, or we express them, but we express them inappropriately, and we let them get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we let them control our lives and our decisions in a way that actually is really unhealthy for us. And sometimes expression of emotion can be really unhelpful for other people around us. It might be that actually we feel it's been good to have a really good outburst, but actually it damages the people round about us. Now we know that from medical research that actually suppression of emotions and inappropriate expression of emotions are both bad for us in terms of our physical health. There's a physician called Gabor Mate who's written a number of books, and one particular book that I really like is called When the Body Says No. And he looks at a number of patients that he'd seen who had chronic illnesses, things like arthritis or cancers or other other sort of serious conditions. And he looked at what might be behind that. Why is it that certain people seem to get certain things? Is there something about their personality type or emotional type, or how how they handle other parts of themselves that makes them more prone to certain illnesses, and can you improve their health by actually acknowledging that and addressing that. So I'd really recommend his book, because he talks about inappropriately suppressed emotions. So people who feel really, really angry, but actually they don't actually allow that to come out. It sort of turns in on them and damages them inside, damages them physically. And then we also know that inappropriate expression of emotions is unhelpful. So we know that anger, inappropriate outbursts of anger, there's an increase. It was on the BBC News a few years ago, research that had been done showing there was an increased incidence of heart attack and stroke following an angry outburst, which is interesting, isn't it? Both those things are actually not good for our health overall. So actually this is an important thing for us to think about, not just for our emotional well-being, not just for the way emotions can tend to rule us and spoil our lives, but also for our physical health as well. So some of the best teaching that I've actually heard about emotions is from Steve Goss, and I'll put the link to the teaching that he does on handling emotions well on the website. But Steve talks about a good example, or a good way of thinking about our emotions is thinking about the car, the dashboard of the car. And on the dashboard of the car, you've got a red light. And that red light comes on as a warning light. And it actually happened to us on holiday a few weeks ago. Our light came on the car. And my immediate response is one of the responses that Steve talks about, which is to ignore it. To say, actually, the light's there, but I'm going to ignore it because I don't want to actually have to do anything about it. I don't want to have to go to the garage. I don't want to do that on holiday. So I felt like I wanted to cover it up. Steve talks about covering up the light so that you can't see it anymore. It's still on, but you can't see it. And that's a good way of thinking about inappropriate suppression of emotion. Another response, which is the inappropriate expression of emotion, is to actually smash it. Just get a hammer and smash the light so that it goes out. And then everything's okay again, isn't it? Because the light's not on anymore. But actually you've caused damage by doing that to the car, but in our lives to ourselves and other people. So what would be the appropriate response with the light on the dashboard? Well, it would be to look under the bonnet, wouldn't it? And that's actually what we did with our car. We found a garage and we got it looked at and found what the problem was. And in our lives, with our emotions, that's what we need to do. Our emotions are a bit like that red light that warn us that something is not quite right underneath the bonnet, underneath the surface. So let's think of an example of that. So an example could be let's think about an appropriate expression of fear. So I'm climbing up a mountain, and it's quite a big mountain and it's quite exposed, and I see the black clouds rolling in of a storm coming that was unexpected. And then I start to see the strikes of lightning in the sky, and I feel frightened. I feel quite a fear. My heart starts to race, my mouth goes dry, and I'm appropriately frightened actually in that situation. And I'm prompted to run to find shelter as soon as I can before that storm comes. Now that's actually something that I've done in the Alps once on holiday a number of years ago with a family, and we ran and found cover. And that's where appropriate fear prompts an appropriate response. So we saw the cloud coming in, we felt the emotion of fear, and we had an appropriate reaction to it. We saw the red light come on and we had an appropriate reaction. Now, if down the line I'm sitting watching the weather on the television and storms are forecast and I feel that same level of fear, then that's not appropriate anymore, is it? I'm in a completely different situation. I'm not exposed on the mountain. I don't have to run for cover, but suddenly I get the same physical feelings in my body and I feel frightened and I'm really worried about the storm coming. But actually, that doesn't make sense anymore. That's an inappropriate response to something that I've seen. and I feel that emotion of fear, and it makes me think, well, why am I feeling that at the moment? Why has that suddenly happened now? And one of the things that I'll come on to is how we can look back and see the patterns of things and where maybe some of those emotions have come from, and how our thinking has actually got out of line because of previous experiences that have happened to us. Another example might be, I don't know, you're walking down the street and you see somebody being assaulted and you're angry. You have a response that's completely wrong for that to happen, and you intervene and you help that person recover in that situation, and you're really angry with what happened to them and what happened with what that person, that assailant, was doing. And that's appropriate anger, and it prompts you to a response that's appropriate. But if you're sat in the office and somebody goes and gets the sandwiches and they bring you, I don't know, tuna and cucumber instead of tuna and sweet corn or whatever it is, and you feel that same level of anger, then that actually isn't appropriate. That's totally inappropriate in the circumstances. So it's important for us to start to think, just start to recognise and acknowledge the emotions that we're having, the feelings that we're having, and the thoughts that go with them, and the physical responses in our bodies, and start to think, okay, is that appropriate? Is this a situation where actually it's appropriate for me to express, or is it actually inappropriate for me to express? And if I've noticed myself over the last week expressing inappropriate emotion, then that's the red light. That is a red light for us to start to think, okay, what might be under the bonnet? What might be behind that I need to address and have a little look at? So let's have a little think about some of the things that we can practically do. I think the first thing is to actually start to think again about our life story. Now, if you go back through the previous podcasts that I've been doing, just this series is about practical tools that we can use to help us live well. And the first one that I did about 4 or 5 weeks ago was about our life story, thinking about what's happened in our lives, what the patterns of things are in our lives and the lives of our families. And that's a really helpful thing to do when we're thinking about emotions. So if we're thinking about inappropriate fear or inappropriate anger or sadness or whatever it is, shame, then seeing that pattern of events in our lives and what's happened is really useful, because it helps us pinpoint where that inappropriate feeling might have come from. And so we're identifying something underneath the bonnet that we can maybe start to take a look at. And the first thing is actually acknowledging it, saying, do you know, I think I have a problem with fear that's inappropriate to the circumstances that I'm in. And maybe tell a friend, maybe actually share that with someone that you trust, and you bring it out into the open and acknowledging that there's a problem there. Now, once we've done that, the next step is to ask ourselves a question, I think, really, which is, do I want to do anything about it? Do I want to change it? Because to change it is actually going to involve some effort and work, and it might feel quite difficult to do that. And we have to be honest with ourselves about whether we want to change things. Because sometimes I think we find it difficult to take responsibility for our stuff and take responsibility for the emotions and the way we express our emotions. So actually just saying, you know, do I actually want to look at this right now? Is it something I really want to change? And if it isn't, if now isn't the moment, that's okay. Sometimes, you know, if you've got a lot of things going on in your life, maybe it's better just to hold it for now. Be aware of it, but now isn't the time to invest. And I've said that to patients before, you know, get your exams out of the way, focus on this particular thing in front of you, you know, get the house move out of the way, then put aside some time and really focus on the emotions and give them the time that they deserve. So sometimes it's appropriate to wait, but asking that question honestly is an important thing to do. I'd just like to mention a couple of things here, actually, that Steve says in his teaching, because I think it's quite helpful as we're starting to think about the emotions and how we want what we want to do with them, how we want to try and help change things. And he talks about goals in our lives and what are our life goals. So, for example, if our life goal is to get a first-class degree and then do a doctorate, then actually that's quite a tough goal because it doesn't totally depend on us. It's uncertain. And uncertainty of life goals can lead to anxiety. If we find that we're getting a lot of anger in our lives, it can be that it's actually a goal that's being blocked. So, for example, if my goal is to get to the supermarket by 11 o'clock and there's a massive traffic jam, then my goal is being blocked and I can get angry. And if I'm feeling really, really depressed, then it may be that there's actually a circumstance in my life where things have become hopeless and impossible. And so depression can actually suggest a life goal that's actually impossible now. We can suddenly see that thing can't happen. So one of the important ways when we're thinking about emotions is to actually think of it as well around goals in our lives and what we're setting ourselves up for. And I think particularly in the culture we live in at the moment, where there's this expectation that we can all have everything that we want and we can achieve everything that we want and anybody can do anything, which to be honest isn't realistic or possible, then we're setting ourselves up for some of these emotions like anxiety and depression and anger because we're actually setting ourselves goals that are not appropriate or possible. And so when you're thinking about your emotions and you're starting to acknowledge some of the things that are going on in your life, bearing that in mind is really helpful. And actually thinking about, actually how can we adjust the goals? How can we change them? How can we downgrade them? How can we get them so that maybe our goal is possible, it's within our control, and so therefore we can get there. And Steve talks about that more in the session. I'll put the link to that session on because I think it's really helpful if you want more detailed information about that. So we've acknowledged that there's a problem, we've decided that we actually want to do something about it, and we're starting to see how some of our story and some of the goals we've set ourselves are fitting into that. So the next thing that we start to do is to make some adjustments. And I think one of the missed adjustments that we have is actually just simple physical things. So things like making sure that we get enough sleep, making sure that we exercise, making sure that our diet is good, that we're not drinking masses of caffeine and energy drinks that keep us on high alert and anxious all the time. And things like switching off our screens early on an evening, not looking at our phones just as we go to bed, letting our minds calm down a little bit before we go to bed, being aware of our circumstances. Because I don't know about you, but I know that if I'm really tired, if I've been working a lot and I'm really tired, then I'm likely to be much more emotional. Or if I've been thinking about lots of different things and felt pressure from lots of different things, I'm more likely to be emotional. If I've not had a chance to do a bit of exercise in the last week, I'm more likely to be emotional. So making those physical, practical adjustments in our lives can actually make a really big difference to how we feel and our emotions and how we handle that. I think my light's just gone off. I'm not quite sure why that is, but never mind. We'll just carry on. So there's physical things. I think the other thing is that occasionally it can be that there's a physical health condition that's tied in with what's going on. So, for example, if our thyroid isn't functioning properly or we've got some underlying hormonal problem, then that can affect us emotionally, and that can be the way it shows itself. So if these unusual emotions or excessive emotions are something new to you, then it would probably be worth just checking that out with somebody, medical or healthcare professional, and or even a friend, just having a talk about it first, and just making sure that there isn't some other reason that needs to be looked at why you might be feeling like that. And then the next thing is to actually say, okay, I've acknowledged, I've done what I can, I'm still really aware that fear is a big issue in my life. And that was the case for me. I had real issues around fear, and it was controlling my life, and it was spoiling a lot of the things in my life. And after I'd done these other things, the next thing that I started to do was to think about the patterns of my thinking, those neuronal pathways, why it was that in certain situations that fear response would come inappropriately. And I started to do some of the work I talked about in a couple of sessions ago about renewing my thinking, about changing the pattern of my thinking, choosing to feel a feeling, but ignore that almost and choose a different pattern of thinking. Now, a book that I found really helpful there was called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by a lady called Susan Jeffers. And she, from her own life experience, talks about sometimes we have to choose to not be controlled by our emotions. So for some people, they need to learn how to express their emotions well and dare to do that. Other people need to learn to ignore their emotions sometimes, like I did, and to make the choice to do something different. So I had to make the choice to go out, even though I felt frightened that something was going to happen to me. And then I had to make the choice to start to exercise again, even though I was frightened something was going to happen to me. And by doing that, you're rewiring and resetting some of these patterns that have come into your thinking over the years from those emotions. I think that's probably most of what I wanted to say today. Let me just check if there was anything else that I wanted to pop in there. Yeah, I think the only other thing that I would say there is just that it's really helpful to get other people on board, and a good friend who you trust, who will also challenge you a little bit, is invaluable. So if you've got a really good friend you can talk to, use them, or a family member, or if you haven't, a health professional, have a look online. Certainly in the UK, we've got something called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, which is a place where you can access help, emotional help, and help with your thinking as well. But talk to someone, get some support with what you're doing, and take some action. I think it's so easy for us to just accept things as they are. I'm just an emotional person, or I'm just an angry person, or an anxious person, or some slight problems with my video today, but never mind. So we're just saying to wrap up, it doesn't have to stay as it is. Your life doesn't have to be as it is. If you're either suppressing emotions and that's damaging you, or you're expressing inappropriately, or you're having feelings that control your life, it's possible for it to change. Take some action, do some research, have a look what's out there. There's lots of information and help online. And I'll put some links, I'll put a number of links on for this session, because I think different things help different people. I think the key things I'd look at are the session that Steve did on handling emotions well. I'll put the link onto that. Also, the Gabor Mate book, When the Body Says No. Some people find the chimp paradox work really, really helpful. Again, looking at handling emotions. And I'll put the links to all those things on. But I think we can all of us can benefit personally from thinking about our emotions and handling them well. But also, when we learn that for ourselves, we can help other people. And we can start to notice when they're really struggling. So when the guy in the office shouts because he's got the wrong sandwich, it's good to maybe say, are you okay? Is there stuff going on that's making you feel really angry at the minute? And we can start to help other people. Some people talk about this as emotional intelligence. And I think, often it's as important as any other kind of intelligence, social intelligence or relational or whatever. It's really important for us, and also for our families and the environment around us and the people around us. So really hope this has helped, and have a look at some of the links and take some time, value it, give yourself some time to think about handling your emotions well.